Jerry was livid. It cost over $50,000 for this customer to replace his fan assembly, Phil, and the unit is just 6 years old. You guys have to do something about these parts prices. This guy's never going to buy again, and he is vocal. I hung up the phone with Jerry, but with a different question than our pricing. Hi, I'm Phil Coerper, Managing Director of Ringling Business Solutions. In this episode of the CEO's Field Manual, we'll dive into a painful product recall that ended up driving amazing innovation. So let's jump right in. After the call with Jerry, I walked down to our service and parts area and stopped by Dennis's desk. Dennis was the senior tech responsible for Jerry's West Coast territory. Hey Dennis, have you talked to Jerry yet? Before I could even get the sentence out, Dennis says, yeah, he just completely lit me up on parts pricing. Tell me more about this fan failure, I said. My engineering senses hated this story, I was told. Have you seen this before? I asked. Now that you mention it, Phil. Walking back to my office, I needed data and I needed it fast. So I started running some queries. The sales data was interesting. We are having a banner year on sales of motor and fan assemblies. This rang a bell as in the quarterly review, Jason, our aftermarket director, was touting better than forecasted part sales. Cross-referencing the unit build dates with the motor and fan replacement is where the story became clear. We almost never had a failure like this until a few years ago when they started to occur. Also, the age of the units involved had a noticeable demarcation date of when they were built. Some quick background on the product to help with the story here. This is a large industrial product sold to the power plant industry. It moves a ton of air when running. So the unit has a motor, typically over 40 horsepower, which is huge, attached to a large fan, turning very fast, over 3,600 RPMs. The assembly is housed in the front of the unit, adjacent to the control panel, where the operator stands to adjust the unit's parameters. The story Dennis told me involved a catastrophic failure, where the fan broke apart while running, damaging most of the front of the unit. Now, the unit was robust in that area, so the event was likely contained within the housing. However, there was potential for a safety issue for the operator here. What started as an upset rep at our parts pricing was about to pull the entire company into one of our largest product recalls with huge implications. I'm now sitting in our Director of Engineering's office. His name is John. He's reviewing the data I had generated on the fan and motor replacements. Now, John was a seasoned and talented engineer, so he was not one to overreact. Facts and analysis were his lifeblood. But he was immediately concerned about the data trends. This looks horrible, Phil, he said. And why the noticeable start date? I answered. What changed in that year? It also looks like a specific size and model, he added. John said, let me do some more digging and we'll meet again in a few hours. It's now the next day and we're in a senior executive meeting about this issue. John is presenting. 6 years ago, he said, we changed the vendors on the larger aluminum casted fans we use because our supplier was not going to continue to build these sizes. Now, we sold this design for over 50 years and our specs have not changed. The trend data shows these fans are failing at an alarming rate. Here's the data on failure trends since the change compared to before. This chart got everyone's attention. Jason, the aftermarket director, had already seen the deck earlier. He was still pale and in shock. He must have been kicking himself. How had he missed a severe problem while enjoying parts sales wins? Robert, the president of the company, asked, what is the failure mode? Catastrophic, John said. These fans weigh hundreds of pounds and are spinning at 3,600 RPM. They literally fly apart. The front of the unit is robust and the event should be contained, so we have yet to get any reported injuries. But that control panel is on the front of the unit, and if someone happens to be standing right in front of it at the wrong time, the gravity of the situation filled the room, and Robert was very concerned. Are we sure no injuries? He asked Jason and Scott, the VP of Sales, who had also joined the meeting. He didn't wait for an answer. Make this a priority, gentlemen. We're headed into full engagement with the reps and customers here. We need a complete picture of what's occurring in the field. Robert then asked, what's the installed base? We had a chart on this and put it up. What a damn mess. The room went silent. We'll have plenty of time to learn how we got here, Robert said. Right now, we have work to do. I've shared examples in previous episodes of how a winning culture pays off in times of crisis. This was certainly one of those times. No discussion of blame, just a focus on how we would move forward. Robert wanted an action plan, and we're going to work on it right there and then. We had an outline ready for discussion, and we started by discussing the end game. This can be a good approach to problem solving in many cases. If you define the future state and work back to crisis management, you can end up with a more cohesive plan. Another point regarding long-term legacy products. A 50-year-old design was likely not fully life cycle tested back in the day. And because it was holding up over the life of the equipment, it would be rare to trigger a revalidation of the product. In this case, John had to design and release a new fan assembly. And we needed a testing process for prototypes that we did not possess at the time. The approach was to find a company that did stress testing on large fans and see if we could engage them to test ours. We got lucky on this and found a partner. If we had to build our own stress testing capability, that would have just taken much too long. Now the harder questions. What do we do with the existing units in the field? A fully transparent recall notification was the easy call. The more pressing question was, do we recommend the units be temporarily decommissioned until an upgrade is provided? These units were prevalent in hospitals and key industries and were vital to these places for their operations. Further, the failure rate was bad enough for a crisis on our end, but still relatively rare compared to the entire installed base. The decision was made to issue a highly transparent recall document to the customers and let them decide if they wanted to use the units in the interim while we ramped up a fan replacement strategy. We provided the option that if they were uncomfortable keeping the units online, we would help them support temporary mobile units through the two main national rental providers for the interim period they were waiting. Once the recall was announced, we'd also need a plan for those customers who may have already had a failure and paid for the replacement. The estimated costs were going to be millions of dollars. But like Tylenol and others in this type of situation, your long-term reputation is paramount. Doing the right thing and taking care of your customers will lead to much more prosperity than trying to cover up or solve large problems on the cheap. Several months later, we had made a ton of progress. Not only did John's stress testing reveal the specific flaw in the casting, we had also tested all our fans, those in stock and those arriving, before shipping to assure they were sound. Another amazing thing happened, though, in the design review meetings. Jason, who was all the way back in the game by this point, was saying, if we are redesigning anyways, can't we find a way to both get a better design and a better price point for the customer? Jason had every reason to keep his head down. Instead, he leaned in, which was awesome. John's team jumped on this as a point of pride. I also added this to my toolbox. When we're redoing something, I always ask for both better and less costly outcomes. Both can be achieved in most cases. I also added faster to the mix. Better, cheaper, faster. Yep, let's go for all three. John's team determined that the best way to make the assembly less costly was to make it more efficient. This led to lower horsepower requirements for the motor and electricity savings for the customers. This process of testing the fan designs, optimizing the stress on the fan, and efficiency led to a new generation of products that were innovative and offered better price points and lower operating costs for the customer. Now that's a win on any level, to be sure. Months later, the new units were shipping, no injuries were ever reported, and the product line that came out of crisis was better than the one that went in. Some takeaways. First, Intellectual curiosity is a trait that is vital to successful executives. It would have been easy to dismiss Jerry's pricing complaint as just a rep complaining. But the curiosity was, why is this fan failing at 6 years in the first place? Intellectual curiosity is not something we need to be born with either. We can practice it and perfect it every day. Secondly, culture and teamwork drives winning, especially in a crisis. Notice these were cross-department managers coming together for a common cause. They were leveraging years of teamwork and trust reserves. Take constant steps to promote cross-functional teamwork. This is harder than it looks and is a huge opportunity for many companies. And finally, the age-old adage, problems are also opportunities, is actually understated in my view. The larger the issue and the more change required to address it, the more opportunity for dramatic improvement. This is particularly impactful if the team focuses on the customer. Like in this case, also looking to improve price point and ultimately cost of ownership. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the CEO's Field Manual. In our next episode, we'll cover the best and worst of ERP implementations and why both end with a thud. We'll see you then. Thanks, everybody. Please subscribe, and we'll see you at a future video.